I'm Samantha Mitchell, 32, and I never thought I'd see my parents again after they disowned me 15 years ago. Yet there they were, walking into the exclusive restaurant where I've been head chef for 3 years, demanding to speak to the owner about the inappropriate person working in the kitchen. They didn't recognize me with my new hair and the burn scar on my cheek, but I recognized them instantly. As they made a scene about wanting me fired, little did they know they were complaining to my husband, the man who owns not just this restaurant, but the entire building my parents were trying to buy. Before I dive into how this family showdown unfolded, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. The way our families shape us, for better or worse, is something we all can relate to. If this story resonates with you even a little, hit that subscribe button so we can share more stories about standing your ground and finding your worth even when the people who should support you the most try to tear you down. I grew up in the affluent neighborhood of Westlake Hills in Austin, Texas, where appearances meant everything. My parents, Eleanor and Richard Mitchell, weren't just wealthy, they were obsessed with status. Our sprawling 6-bedroom house hosted charity galas and business dinners where everyone wore designer labels and discussed their latest European vacations. But behind closed doors, our family was anything but picture perfect. From my earliest memories, I knew I didn't fit the mold my parents had created for the Mitchell family image. While my mother spent hours at salons maintaining her perfect blonde highlights and my father networked on the golf course, I found solace in our kitchen. Our family chef Antonio became my first real friend when I was just 8 years old. "The kitchen is no place for a young lady of your standing," my mother would scold whenever she found me helping Antonio prepare dinner. "You'll ruin your clothes and your hands will look like a servant's." But Antonio saw something in me that my parents never bothered to notice: genuine passion. When my parents were away on business trips, which was often, he'd teach me knife skills and the difference between simmering and sautéing. "You have the touch, Samantha," he'd say in his gentle Italian accent. "Some people cook for years and never understand food the way you do naturally." My younger brother Andrew was the golden child. 3 years my junior, he was being groomed from kindergarten to eventually take over Mitchell Enterprises, our family's thriving real estate development business. While I struggled to maintain the straight, as my parents demanded, social graces never came naturally to me. Andrew, however, could charm adults by age 5 with his perfect manners and calculated smile. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became the soundtrack of my childhood, usually followed by criticism about my weight, my posture, or my lack of interest in the social connections that would set me up for success. The contrast between how they treated us was stark. When Andrew expressed interest in golf, my father hired a professional coach. When I asked for cooking equipment, my mother laughed and suggested I focus on finding a husband who could afford a personal chef instead. I remember one particular evening when I was 14 that crystallized everything wrong with my family dynamic. My parents were hosting an important dinner party for potential investors. An hour before guests arrived, our chef Antonio came down with food poisoning. In a panic, my mother considered canceling until I volunteered to cook instead. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "These are important people." But with no other options, she reluctantly agreed, hovering anxiously as I prepared a 3-course meal from Antonio's planned menu. I still remember the nervous energy coursing through me as I plated the final dessert, a delicate panna cotta with fresh berries, just as the doorbell rang. That night, guests raved about the food. One woman, the wife of my father's biggest potential investor, asked to meet the chef who made this extraordinary meal. My momentary pride evaporated when I saw my mother's face tighten into a forced smile. "Our regular chef prepared everything in advance," she lied smoothly. "Unfortunately, he had to leave for a family emergency." Later that night, after the guests had gone, instead of praise, my mother pulled me aside. "That was completely inappropriate," she hissed. "A Mitchell doesn't work in the kitchen. What if someone had seen you? What would they think of our family?" My father added coldly, "We have an image to maintain, Samantha. Your behavior reflects on all of us." That night, I cried myself to sleep, not understanding why something I loved and was apparently good at could bring such shame to my family. As I entered my teen years, my parents' control tightened. Every extracurricular activity was chosen to build the perfect college application. My savings account, funded by grandparents for my future, remained firmly under my parents' control until you're mature enough to make responsible decisions. I learned to hide my passion. Antonio continued teaching me in secret, slipping me cookbooks that I hid under my mattress like contraband. I'd study them late at night, memorizing techniques and flavor combinations, while my classmates memorized calculus formulas and SAT vocabulary. Sometimes Antonio would bring me ingredients from the farmer's market, and I'd experiment when my parents were out. These small acts of rebellion kept me sane in a household where I never felt good enough, where every family dinner became an opportunity for my father's explosive temper, or my mother's icy calculated punishments when I failed to meet their impossible standards. By 17, I knew something would have to give. The weight of their expectations against the pull of my own passions was tearing me apart inside. But I never imagined just how completely my family would betray me when forced to choose between their perfect image and their flesh and blood daughter. During my senior year of high school, while my parents thought I was applying to Ivy League business programs as instructed, I was secretly submitting applications to culinary schools. Each application felt like both a betrayal and the most honest thing I'd ever done. When the thick envelope arrived from the Culinary Institute of America with a partial scholarship offer, I hid it in my room for 3 days, alternating between elation and terror. I knew what would happen when I told my parents, but I couldn't keep pretending to be someone I wasn't just to maintain the family image. I chose a Sunday evening to tell them naively, thinking that after church and a relaxing family dinner they might be more receptive. My hands trembled as I placed the acceptance letter on the dining table. "I need to talk to you about college," I began. My father barely glanced up from his phone. "Harvard sent the alumni interview request. I've scheduled you with Thomas Bradford next Tuesday. Wear the blue blazer, it photographs well." "Actually," I said, my voice quavering, "I won't be needing that interview." That got their attention. My mother set down her wine glass with a sharp click. "I've been accepted to the Culinary Institute of America," I continued, pushing the letter toward them. "With a scholarship. I want to be a chef." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face flushed deep red, while my mother's paled to a ghostly white. "Is this some kind of joke?" my father finally sputtered. "No, sir. I've wanted this for years. Cooking is my passion, and I'm good at it. Antonio says I have real talent." "Antonio," my mother's voice dripped with disdain. "The help has been encouraging this ridiculous notion." My father slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. "Absolutely not. No daughter of mine is going to waste her life as a glorified cook. You're going to Harvard or Yale like we planned. End of discussion." "But I don't want to study business," I argued, feeling a strange calm descend over me, despite my racing heart. "I've never wanted that." "What you want is irrelevant," my mother cut in. "We've invested too much in your future to watch you throw it away on this hobby." "It's not a hobby, it's what I love, what I'm meant to do." My father stood up, looming over me. "Let me make this perfectly clear, Samantha. Either you attend the business school we've selected, or you are cut off completely. No tuition, no allowance, no trust fund. Nothing." I looked at my brother Andrew, hoping for support, but he stared at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. "You have until tomorrow to come to your senses," my father continued. "I suggest you spend tonight reconsidering your priorities and what it means to be a Mitchell." That night was one of the longest of my life. I paced my room, weighing my options, knowing that without financial support, my partial scholarship wouldn't be enough. But the thought of spending 4 years studying something I hated, followed by a lifetime in a career that would slowly kill my spirit, felt unbearable. By morning, I had made my decision. I would find a way to make it work. The final confrontation happened over dinner the next evening. My parents had invited several family friends, clearly assuming public pressure would force me to conform. So Samantha, my father's business partner, boomed across the table. "Richard tells me you'll be following the family tradition at Harvard this fall, planning to major in business like your old man." Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. Actually, she's still considering her options. Perhaps economics with a minor in international relations. I set down my fork. "That's not true. I've decided to attend culinary school in New York." The table fell silent. My father's face darkened as he excused us from the table. "Family matter to discuss," he told his guests with a tight smile. "Please enjoy dessert." In his study, the facade dropped completely. "This is your final chance," he growled. "Harvard or nothing." I straightened my shoulders. "Then it's nothing. Think about what you're doing," my mother pleaded, though her concern seemed more for the family reputation than my happiness. "What will people say? The Mitchell name has never meant as much to me as it does to you," I finished. My father pointed to the door. "Then you are no longer a Mitchell. You have 1 hour to pack your things and get out of my house." "Richard," my mother gasped, though I couldn't tell if she was shocked by his cruelty or my defiance. "I mean it, Eleanor. If she doesn't value what we've built, she doesn't deserve to benefit from it." The next hour passed in a blur. I stuffed a single suitcase with clothes and a few treasured possessions. When I tried to access my bank account from my bedroom computer, I discovered it had already been emptied. My credit cards were declined when I tested them. They had moved with shocking efficiency to cut me off completely. As I dragged my suitcase downstairs, Andrew finally spoke to me for the first time since the previous night. "I'm sorry, Sam," he whispered, glancing nervously toward our father's study. "You knew I was applying to culinary school, didn't you?" I asked suddenly, understanding the timing of everything. "I kept the brochures in my desk drawer." His guilty expression confirmed my suspicion. "Dad asked me if I knew what was going on with you." I couldn't lie to him. The betrayal stung worse than my parents' rejection. Andrew had been my confidant, the one person I thought understood me. "They're doing this for your own good," he added weakly. "No, they're doing it for themselves," I replied, then walked out the front door without looking back. Antonio was waiting in the kitchen when I snuck in through the service entrance to say goodbye. "I heard," he said, simply pulling me into a fatherly hug. "Your parents, they make big mistake." He pressed an envelope into my hands. Inside was $2,000 in cash and a slip of paper with an address and phone number. "My cousin Marco in New York," he explained. "He and his wife will help until you find your feet. And this," he added, pressing his favorite chef's knife into my hands, "you take, for your new start." Tears streamed down my face as I embraced him one last time. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. You go show them what Samantha can do," he said fiercely. "And remember, family is not always blood." With those words echoing in my mind, I walked out of the only home I'd ever known, carrying one suitcase, Antonio's knife, and the crushing knowledge that to my parents' family loyalty only mattered when it served their interests. The Greyhound bus ride from Austin to New York took nearly 2 days. I sat beside the window watching America roll by, alternating between numbness and panic. By the time I arrived at Port Authority bus terminal, I was exhausted, terrified, and completely alone for the first time in my life. Marco and his wife Lucia lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Their kindness was the only thing that kept me from collapsing during those first few weeks. "Stay as long as you need," Lucia insisted, though their cramped living room sofa was hardly a long-term solution. Marco worked as a sous chef at an Italian restaurant in Manhattan. Through his connection, I landed my first kitchen job washing dishes for minimum wage. The glamorous culinary career I'd imagined couldn't have been further from the reality of scrubbing pots until my hands cracked and bled. After 2 months with Marco and Lucia, I found the cheapest apartment I could, a fifth-floor walk-up in the Bronx, with 3 roommates I barely saw, because of our opposing work schedules. The building had roaches, unreliable heat, and neighbors who screamed at each other until dawn, but it was mine, paid for with money I earned myself. My days quickly fell into a punishing routine. Dishwashing shifts from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., followed by waitressing at a different restaurant from 5 p.m. to midnight. Between jobs I attended community college culinary classes, slowly building credits I could transfer once I saved enough for professional school. The physical toll was immense. My hands developed calluses where blisters had once been. I lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. Some nights I'd miss the last subway and have to choose between an expensive taxi or walking 40 blocks home in the dark. Worse than the physical exhaustion was the loneliness. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to call home, before remembering there was no home to call. I tried reaching out once about 3 months after leaving. The family phone number had been changed. My email to my mother bounced back. The message was clear: I no longer existed to them. 6 months into my new life, I reached a breaking point. While restocking napkins at the diner where I waitressed, I spotted a familiar face on the cover of Texas Business Monthly. My father stood proudly next to Andrew, the headline, announcing Mitchell Enterprises expands father-son team launches largest development project yet. I locked myself in the employee bathroom and sobbed until my manager pounded on the door, threatening to fire me if I didn't get back on the floor immediately. That night, I seriously considered giving up. Maybe my parents had been right. Maybe I was fooling myself thinking I could make it on my own. With my last $20, I bought a bottle of cheap wine and drank it alone in my apartment, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. In the morning, I woke with a splitting headache and a decision: I would give myself 1 more year. If things hadn't improved by then, I would reconsider my options. That rock-bottom moment became my turning point. I started volunteering to prep vegetables during slow periods at the restaurant, soaking up techniques from the line cooks. I took on catering gigs on my rare days off. I traded shifts to make time for more classes. Small victories kept me going. My first promotion from dishwasher to prep cook came with a $1 raise per hour. When one of my recipes was added to the diner's specials board, I took a photo and kept it in my wallet. I found unexpected allies, other kitchen staff who shared meals with me when money ran tight, regular customers who requested my tables and left generous tips. Holidays were the hardest. That first Thanksgiving, I worked a double shift rather than sit alone in my apartment. Christmas Eve found me huddled around a space heater with my roommates, drinking boxed wine from plastic cups. We were all estranged from our families for different reasons, creating a makeshift celebration from our shared loneliness. During my second year in New York, I met chef Isabelle Laurent at a food industry networking event. I'd scraped together the registration fee to attend. French-trained and formidable, Isabelle had a reputation for being brutally honest but fiercely supportive of promising talent. After tasting my sample dish, a humble soup that showcased technique over expensive ingredients, she fixed me with a penetrating stare. "You have something," she said bluntly, "but you need proper training." When I explained my financial situation, she surprised me by offering a position as her personal assistant, with a flexible schedule that would allow me to attend culinary school part-time. "I recognize the hunger in your eyes," she told me, "not just for food but for knowledge. That cannot be taught." Working with Isabelle was demanding but transformative. She pushed me harder than anyone ever had, criticizing my knife skills, my timing, my plating, but always with the goal of improvement, never to break my spirit. With her recommendation, I secured a scholarship to complete my formal culinary education. The day I received the acceptance letter, I permitted myself a small indulgence: a phone call to Antonio. the only person from my past who still believed in me. "I knew you would do it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your parents, they ask about you sometimes, you know." "They do," I couldn't help the flicker of hope. "Not directly. They ask if I have heard from you. I tell them nothing." "Thank you," I whispered, grateful for his loyalty. "Your brother, though, he asks more. Seems genuinely worried." I closed my eyes, remembering Andrew's betrayal. He made his choice. People can change, Samantha. Remember that. I wasn't ready to forgive, but Antonio's words planted a seed that would take years to germinate. By my third year in New York, I had moved to a slightly better apartment, one where I only had one roommate and occasionally had hot water. I had graduated from Isabel's assistant to her sous chef at a respected Manhattan restaurant. I was developing my own culinary voice, clean, precise French techniques applied to the comfort foods I'd learned from Antonio, with unexpected flavor combinations that reflected my own journey. I was surviving, sometimes even thriving. But the hole my family had left remained an empty space I filled with 14-hour workdays and the pursuit of culinary perfection. I was building a new life, but the foundation still bore cracks from what had been torn away. Little did I know that fate would eventually bring everything full circle in the most unexpected way possible. After graduating from culinary school, I threw myself into building my career with single-minded determination. The prestigious kitchens of New York became my battleground, each position a stepping stone, each chef a potential mentor, each service a chance to prove myself. While many of my classmates sought the glamour of trendy restaurants or Food Network appearances, I gravitated toward the old-school kitchens, where technique and discipline reigned supreme. I worked under French, Italian, and Japanese masters, absorbing their philosophies while developing my own. "You cook with your heart as much as your hands," one chef told me after a particularly grueling service. "That cannot be taught." My rise wasn't without setbacks. During a chaotic Saturday dinner service at Maison, where I'd been working as a line cook for nearly a year, disaster struck. A server bumped into me as I was transferring a pot of hot oil. The searing liquid splashed across my face and chest, sending me to the emergency room with second-degree burns. The physical pain was excruciating, but the fear was worse, fear that my career might be over before it truly began. After the bandages came off, a jagged scar remained running from my right temple down to my jawline. The plastic surgeon suggested additional procedures to minimize its appearance, but I declined. "The scar stays," I decided. "It's part of my story now." Strangely, that scar became a turning point in more ways than one. Before the accident, I'd still carried the remnants of my mother's voice in my head, critiquing my appearance, measuring my worth through other people's perceptions. The burn forced me to redefine beauty on my terms. When I returned to the kitchen, I did so with a new confidence that had nothing to do with how I looked. It was around this time that I first met James Reed. He'd made his name as a restaurateur who could spot talent and trends before they became mainstream. His restaurant group owned 6 successful establishments across Manhattan, each with a distinct identity, but united by an unwavering commitment to quality. James came into Maison one Tuesday evening, typically the slowest night of the week when I was experimenting with a new special. He requested to meet the chef who created the dish he'd just eaten. When I emerged from the kitchen scar and all his eyes registered surprise for only a moment before warming with genuine interest. "That was the most honest plate of food I've eaten in months," he said. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" We talked for nearly an hour after the restaurant closed, discussing everything from ingredient sourcing to kitchen management philosophies. 2 weeks later, he offered me a position as sous chef at Reed's, his flagship restaurant in the Flatiron District. Working for James was different from any kitchen experience I'd had before. He valued innovation, but never at the expense of flavor. He demanded excellence, but created an environment where chefs could thrive rather than merely survive. For the first time, I found myself in a kitchen that felt like partnership rather than dictatorship. My seasonal tasting menus began drawing attention from food critics and industry insiders. A glowing review in the New York Times mentioned my distinctive approach that balances technical precision with emotional resonance. When James promoted me to head chef after just 2 years, the announcement made the food section of several major publications. Throughout this period, I maintained my privacy carefully. I used my married name professionally. I had married James in a small ceremony with only our closest friends present. I avoided being photographed when possible, not out of vanity but self-protection. The thought of my parents discovering my success through a magazine spread or newspaper article filled me with complicated emotions I wasn't ready to face. James understood my reticence about publicity and respected my boundaries. Our relationship had evolved gradually, from professional admiration to friendship to something deeper. He knew my full story and never pushed me to reconcile with my family. Some bridges stay burned for a reason, he'd say, whenever I mentioned the unresolved feelings that occasionally surfaced. Together we opened Samara, a restaurant that represented the culmination of everything I'd learned and everything I'd overcome. The name, a subtle nod to my own, meant protected by God in Hebrew, something James had researched as a surprise. The space was intimate but not pretentious, with an open kitchen design that allowed me to connect with diners while maintaining the precision I valued. Within 6 months of opening, we received our first Michelin star. The night of the announcement, James and I opened a bottle of champagne on our apartment's rooftop terrace, overlooking the city that had both broken and rebuilt me. To the chef who has more talent in her pinky finger than most have in their entire bodies, he toasted. And to the man who saw that when I couldn't see it myself, I replied, clinking my glass against his. As we stood looking out at the twinkling skyline, I felt a sense of peace I'd never expected to find. I had built something real, something that was entirely mine, without the Mitchell name or money. The angry wounded girl who'd stepped off a Greyhound bus with one suitcase had transformed into a woman who created experiences that brought joy to others. I had stopped checking Texas business news years ago, no longer torturing myself with glimpses of the family that had discarded me. Antonio had retired and moved back to Italy, our occasional phone calls becoming my only tenuous connection to my former life. I didn't know if my parents had tried to find me, and I convinced myself I didn't care. But fate has a way of closing circles when you least expect it. And sometimes the universe delivers a reckoning so perfectly timed, it almost feels like divine intervention. If you've been enjoying this journey so far, I'd love to know if you've ever had to rebuild yourself after someone tried to tear you down. Sometimes the most powerful growth comes after our deepest wounds. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next when my carefully constructed new life collided with the past I thought I'd left behind. The Wednesday evening service started like any other. Samara had been open for just over 3 years, and we'd settled into the comfortable rhythm of success. Our reservation book was consistently filled weeks in advance, but Wednesdays typically offered a slightly more relaxed pace than the weekend rush. That night was unusually busy, however. A prominent food blogger had featured our seasonal tasting menu the previous week, triggering a fresh wave of interest. I was focused intently on plating a delicate scallop dish when our hostess Zoe appeared at the kitchen entrance, her professional smile strained at the edges. "Chef, there's a situation with table 12, she said quietly. "They're insisting on speaking with the owner." James looked up from where he was reviewing wine pairings with our sommelier. "What seems to be the problem?" "They have concerns about staff," Zoe said, her eyes flicking briefly toward me. "In our restaurant, complaints were rare but taken seriously." James squeezed my shoulder as he passed. "Keep things moving. I'll handle whatever this is." I nodded already, turning my attention back to the orders lining up. 10 minutes passed in the focused intensity that I loved about service, the coordination of my team, the precise timing, the transformation of raw ingredients into art on a plate. Then I heard a voice that sliced through the kitchen noise like a blade. "This is completely unacceptable. Do you know how much we're paying to dine here?" My hands froze mid-garnish. That cultured, imperious tone had featured in both my fondest childhood memories and my darkest nightmares. My mother's voice hadn't changed in 15 years. The expensive black truffle I was shaving nearly slipped from my fingers. "Marco," now my sous chef, noticed immediately. "Chef, everything okay?" I couldn't answer. Through the open kitchen design that I usually loved, I could see James standing beside a table where my parents sat, looking exactly as I remembered, yet somehow older. My father's hair had gone completely silver, and my mother's face showed signs of too many cosmetic procedures. "I assure you, sir," James was saying in his most diplomatic voice, "all our staff are highly trained professionals." "Well, clearly your standards need revision," my father replied dismissively. "That woman with the disfigurement should not be visible to diners. It's affecting our enjoyment of the meal." My scar. They were complaining about my scar, not recognizing that the disfigured chef was their own daughter. The truffle slipped from my trembling fingers, landing on the immaculate kitchen floor. Marco grabbed my arm as I swayed slightly. "Samantha, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I whispered, unable to tear my eyes from the scene unfolding in the dining room. "Those people at table 12. They're my parents." Marco's eyes widened. He knew my story. Most of my kitchen staff did, though I rarely discussed it. "Do you want to step out? I can cover the pass." I shook my head, then made a snap decision. "I need 5 minutes." The walk-in freezer had been my refuge in every kitchen I'd worked in. Something about the icy air and muffled silence always helped clear my head in moments of crisis. I leaned against the shelves of precisely labeled containers, breathing deeply until the panic subsided. Through the thick door, I could hear raised voices. My father had never been good at controlling his temper when he felt his demands weren't being met with appropriate deference. When I emerged, James was back in the kitchen, his expression tight with controlled anger. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound normal. "Just some difficult customers," he replied. "They're complaining about, well, everything, but particularly about the chef with the unsightly scar being visible from their table." A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, which I disguised as a cough. "What did you tell them?" "That I'm proud of every member of my staff, and suggested they might be more comfortable dining elsewhere if they found our open kitchen concept distressing." His expression softened. "But they're refusing to leave until they speak with the building owner. Apparently, they're interested in purchasing the property for some development project." The irony was almost too perfect. My parents had no idea that the owner they were demanding to speak with was married to the daughter they'd thrown away. James I said quietly, "There's something you should know. Those people at table 12, they're my parents." His eyes widened in shock. "Are you serious? They're the ones who—" "Yes, and they don't recognize me." I touched my scar reflexively. "It's been 15 years, and I look different now. Do you want me to tell them to leave? Say the owner isn't available?" His protective instinct was immediate. I considered it for a moment. The temptation to hide to avoid the confrontation was powerful. But something else was rising within me, a strength forged through years of rebuilding myself from nothing. "No," I decided. "Let's finish service. They can wait." For the next 2 hours, I cooked with mechanical precision, hyper-aware of my parents' presence just beyond the kitchen. They ordered the full tasting menu despite their complaints, drinking 2 bottles of our most expensive wine. Some things never changed. As the dining room gradually emptied and the last desserts went out, Zoe appeared again at the kitchen door. "They're still here," she said apologetically, insisting on waiting for the owner. James looked at me. "What do you want to do?" I removed my chef's coat, smoothed my hair, and straightened my shoulders. I think it's time to find out why they really came. The restaurant had emptied except for my parents, who sat nursing the remnants of their wine. They'd positioned themselves like royalty, expecting an audience, my mother's perfect posture and my father's impatient finger-tapping exactly as I remembered. James walked slightly ahead of me as we approached their table. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell," James began politely. "I'm James Reed, the owner of Samara. I understand you wanted to speak with me." My father extended his hand without standing. "Richard Mitchell, Mitchell Enterprises. This is my wife, Eleanor. And this," James continued, stepping aside, "is my wife and head chef, Samantha Reed." I stepped forward into the light. For a moment there was no recognition in their eyes, just the same dismissive evaluation they'd give any service staff. Then my mother's gaze settled on my face, moving past the scar to the features underneath. Her wineglass froze halfway to her lips. "Samantha." My father's reaction was slower confusion giving way to disbelief as he recognized the daughter he'd discarded. "What is this?" he demanded, looking between James and me. "Some kind of joke?" "No joke," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Just an unexpected family reunion." An awkward silence fell over the table. Other staff members pretended to busy themselves with closing duties, but I knew they were watching intently. Most had heard fragments of my story over the years. My mother recovered first years of social training kicking in. "Samantha, you've changed." The understatement was almost laughable. The scared teenager they'd thrown out had been replaced by a confident chef, with a Michelin star and a successful restaurant. The scar they'd complained about was just the most visible transformation. 15 years will do that," I replied. My father's business instincts overtook his shock. "Had we known this was your establishment," he said, his tone shifting to the one he used for negotiations, "this meeting would have proceeded quite differently." "Would it?" I asked coolly. "You didn't seem to have any trouble criticizing my appearance or demanding my removal from my own kitchen." He waved this away as if it were a minor misunderstanding. "We didn't recognize you, obviously." "The scar is from a kitchen accident 6 years ago," I finished for him. "Oil burns at 450 degrees Fahrenheit. It's an occupational hazard in the profession you thought was beneath our family." My mother winced at my directness. She'd always preferred to maintain pleasant fictions rather than acknowledge uncomfortable truths. "Well," she said, with forced brightness, "this is certainly a surprise. You've done well for yourself. Despite everything." The condescension in her tone made my blood boil, but I maintained my professional demeanor. The restaurant staff was still watching, and I wouldn't give my parents the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. "I understand you're interested in purchasing this building," I said, changing the subject. My father seized on the business opening. "Yes. Mitchell Enterprises is developing a luxury retail and residential complex in this neighborhood. This property is key to our plans." "And you've been negotiating with who exactly?" James asked. "Some property management company," my father replied dismissively. "They've been entirely unreasonable about the price point. We were hoping to appeal directly to the owner." James smiled thinly. "That would be me. I own not just the restaurant but the entire building." My father's expression flickered with surprise before settling into his negotiator face. "Well, this is fortuitous then. Family should help family. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone." The audacity was breathtaking. 15 years of no contact, and now they wanted to leverage our connection for a business deal. "Family," I repeated. "That's an interesting choice of words from people who told me, and I quote, 'We have no daughter anymore.'" My mother at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That was a very emotional time, Samantha. Things were said in the heat of the moment." "Things were done in the heat of the moment too," I corrected her. like emptying my bank accounts and cutting off all contact for 15 years. Before they could respond, the front door opened, and a familiar figure walked in. My brother Andrew had aged well, his tailored suit and confident stride, projecting the successful businessman he'd been groomed to be. Unlike our parents, he recognized me instantly. "Sam," he stopped short, staring at me in disbelief. "Is that really you?" "Hello, Andrew," I said, the complex emotions of seeing my once closest confidant, rendering my voice nearly a whisper. "You know each other?" my father asked, confused. Andrew shot him an incredulous look. "Dad, it's Samantha, your daughter." "We're aware," my mother said, stiffly. "We were just catching up." Andrew approached cautiously, as if I might disappear if he moved too quickly. "I've been looking for you for years," he said quietly. "After college, I tried to find you, but it was like you'd vanished." "That was the point," I replied. My father cleared his throat impatiently. "As touching as this reunion is, we're here on business. Andrew has been handling the negotiations for this property unsuccessfully, I might add." Andrew flushed, looking between me and our father. "I didn't know. The owner's name on the paperwork was James Reed. I had no idea you were connected to this building." "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private," my mother suggested, glancing uncomfortably at the staff members who had abandoned all pretense of not listening. James looked to me, letting me make the call. "We can use my office," I said finally. As we moved toward the back of the restaurant, I felt like I was leading strangers through my domain. These people who had once controlled every aspect of my life now followed me, taking in the evidence of the success I'd achieved without them. My office walls displayed the tangible proof of my journey. Framed reviews, my Michelin-star certification photos with renowned chefs I now called friends. My parents' eyes lingered on these markers of the accomplishments they'd missed. Once the door closed behind us, the facade of polite reunion crumbled. My father launched immediately into business mode. "This property is essential to our development plans," he stated bluntly. "We're prepared to make a generous offer." James and I exchanged glances. "We're not interested in selling," he replied. "Everyone has a price," my father insisted. "Name yours." "It's not about money," I said. "This restaurant is our life's work." My mother sighed dramatically. "Always so stubborn, Samantha. Some things never change." Andrew shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Maybe we should take a step back. We're talking to family here, not just business associates." "Family," I laughed without humor. "Is that what we are?" "Of course we are," my mother said, as if the last 15 years had been a minor disagreement. "Blood is thicker than water. Funny how that only applies when you want something from me." My father's patience visibly thinned. "Look, whatever grievances you're holding on to from the past, this is business. And frankly, our company needs this deal." That caught my attention. Mitchell Enterprises had always been extraordinarily successful, at least according to the carefully cultivated public image. "What do you mean, needs?" I asked. Andrew looked down, avoiding eye contact. My father shot him a warning glance. "Simply that this development is important to our portfolio," my father amended smoothly. "That's not what you meant," I pressed, years of reading people in business negotiations making his discomfort obvious. The tension in the room thickened as I realized there was more to this story than a simple real estate transaction. "Tell her," Andrew said suddenly. "She deserves to know the truth." My father's face darkened with anger, but Andrew continued, "We're not in a position to negotiate as if we have the upper hand. Not anymore." As my brother's words hung in the air, I realized this confrontation was about to reveal far more than I had expected, and that the power dynamics that had defined my childhood had shifted irrevocably. The silence that followed Andrew's outburst was deafening. My father glared at him with the same disapproving look I remembered from childhood, but Andrew didn't back down. "They need to know what they're dealing with," he insisted. "This is hardly appropriate," my mother hissed. James leaned forward, his business instincts engaged. I think transparency would benefit everyone at this point. My father loosened his tie slightly, a telltale sign of discomfort I remembered from watching his business negotiations as a child. Mitchell Enterprises is facing some temporary financial constraints. That's putting it mildly, Andrew muttered. What kind of constraints? I asked, professional curiosity overtaking personal animosity. My father seemed to debate internally how much to reveal before sighing heavily. A development project in Houston went significantly over budget. Investors pulled out. We've been leveraging other assets to cover the losses. Over-leveraging, Andrew corrected. To the tune of $40 million. My mother shot him a venomous look. Andrew, please. The golden child was finally rebelling. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed the irony. The downtown Austin project was supposed to right the ship, my father continued reluctantly. But we need this property to complete the parcel. Without it, the entire project falls apart, along with our financing. And with it, Mitchell Enterprises, Andrew added bluntly. The company that had been the center of our family universe, the altar upon which my own dreams had been sacrificed, was on the verge of collapse. The revelation should have brought satisfaction, but I felt oddly hollow. So this isn't about expanding your empire, I said. It's about saving it. My father's jaw tightened. Every business faces challenges. This is merely a temporary setback. It's more than that, Andrew contradicted him. Dad made some high-risk investments that didn't pan out. And he hesitated, then squared his shoulders. I made mistakes too. Bad calls. Used company funds for personal expenses that snowballed. You embezzled from the company, I asked, incredulous. It wasn't embezzlement, my mother interjected defensively. Just accounting irregularities. James raised an eyebrow. That sounds like the definition of embezzlement. Andrew had the decency to look ashamed. I got in over my head. Gambling debts mainly. Dad covered for me, but it drained company reserves right when we needed them most. The perfect son, the worthy heir, had nearly tanked the family business. The revelation would have been vindicating if it weren't so tragic. And now you need us to bail you out, I concluded. We need to make a fair business transaction, my father corrected stiffly. The fact that you happen to be connected to the property is coincidental. Nothing about this is coincidental, I replied. You walked into my restaurant, insulted me without recognizing me, and now expect me to help save the company that was more important to you than your own daughter. My mother reached across the table, her manicured hand stopping short of touching mine. Samantha dear, I know we've had our differences. Differences, I cut her off. You disowned me. You threw me out with one suitcase when I was 17. We did what was necessary for the family, she insisted. For the company, you mean? They're one and the same, my father stated, as if this were an obvious truth. Not to me, I replied. They never were. Andrew looked at me with what seemed like genuine regret. I should have stood up for you back then. I knew what they were doing was wrong, but I was too scared to say anything. You did worse than say nothing, I reminded him. You told them about my culinary school applications. He flinched at the accusation but didn't deny it. I was 16 and desperate for approval. It's not an excuse, but I've regretted it every day since. My father made an impatient noise. This family therapy session is touching, but it doesn't address the matter at hand. We need a decision on the property. After 15 years of silence, that's all you have to say, I asked incredulously. No apology, no acknowledgement of what you did, just a business proposition. What would you have us say, he demanded. That we made a mistake, fine, perhaps we were somewhat harsh. But you were throwing away opportunities most people would kill for. For what? To become a cook, my mother added, unable to keep the disdain from her voice even now. A Michelin-starred chef, James corrected her. One of the most respected culinary talents in New York. Regardless, my father pressed on, what's done is done. We're offering an opportunity to move forward. Family helping family. Family loyalty only seems to matter when it benefits you, I observed. My mother's perfectly maintained composure finally cracked. Do you have any idea what it's been like? The questions from friends, from business associates, having to explain your absence at every family function for 15 years. I imagine about as difficult as being homeless at 17 because your parents cared more about appearances than their child's happiness. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. We gave you every advantage, except the freedom to choose my own path. My father's patience visibly evaporated. Enough of this. We're offering well above market value for the property. Yes, we need this deal, but you stand to profit handsomely. James, who had been observing the exchange with quiet intensity, finally spoke. You seem to be operating under the misapprehension that we're interested in selling at any price. We're not. Everyone has a price, my father insisted. Not everyone shares your values, Richard James replied coolly. My father's face flushed with anger. I don't think you understand the opportunity here. This could be extremely lucrative for both parties. Or, James countered, you could lose everything while we continue our successful business undisturbed. My mother turned to me, desperation creeping into her voice. Samantha, surely you don't want to see your family ruined. Whatever our past differences, we're still your parents. The appeal might have worked once before I'd built a life and family of my own. Now it felt like a transparent manipulation. You decided we weren't family the night you threw me out, I said quietly. You can't reclaim that relationship just because you need something from me now. Andrew looked between us, his expression pained. Sam, I know we don't deserve your help. I certainly don't. But there are hundreds of employees who depend on Mitchell Enterprises for their livelihoods. People who had nothing to do with how you were treated. That consideration gave me pause. Innocent people suffering for my family's mistakes, and my refusal to help it wasn't a comfortable thought. James sensed my hesitation. We should discuss this privately, he suggested, standing up. I think we've all had enough revelations for one evening. My father began to protest, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. Let them talk, she said wearily. Pushing harder won't help. As James and I stepped outside my office to confer, I felt the weight of the past and present colliding. Whatever decision we made would define not just a business transaction, but the possibility or impossibility of reconciliation with the family that had once defined my entire existence. James and I found a quiet corner in the now empty restaurant. The staff had discreetly finished closing duties and left understanding, without being told that we needed privacy. What do you want to do? James asked, simply. I leaned against the bar, emotions warring within me. Part of me wants to tell them to go to hell, I admitted. Let the company fail, let them experience even a fraction of the desperation I felt when they cut me off. He nodded, understanding the temptation. And the other part? Wonders if revenge is really what I need. I've spent 15 years proving I don't need them. Maybe that's enough. James took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. This is your call. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. I closed my eyes, memories washing over me. Christmas mornings, before things went wrong. My father teaching me to ride a bike, my mother brushing my hair before school. Then darker memories, the coldness in their eyes, when they ordered me to leave the empty bank account, the lonely holidays in my tiny New York apartment. They never even tried to find me, I said softly. Not once in 15 years. No, James agreed, they didn't. But those employees Andrew mentioned, they're innocent in all this. James considered this. We could offer terms. What kind of terms? Ones that address more than just the business side of things. Conditions that provide some accountability for how they treated you. The idea took root in my mind. Not revenge exactly, but a reckoning, and perhaps closure. I need to think about exactly what that would look like, I said. Take all the time you need. But time was precisely what my family didn't have. Their desperate appearance at our restaurant made that clear. When we returned to my office, the atmosphere had shifted. My parents sat stiffly side by side, their usual commanding presence diminished. Andrew paced by the window, stopping when we entered. "We've discussed the situation," I began, keeping my voice neutral and professional. "We're not willing to sell the building." My father's face hardened. "I see. However," I continued, "we might consider leasing a portion of the space to Mitchell Enterprises with specific conditions." Hope flickered in their eyes. "What conditions?" my mother asked cautiously. I took a deep breath. "First, a formal public acknowledgement of me as your daughter, and my accomplishments as a chef." My mother blanched. "Public, Samantha, our private family matters aren't." "Private family matters stopped being private when you made me homeless," I cut her off. "Second condition, financial support for a culinary scholarship foundation in my name, specifically for students whose families refuse to support their education." My father started to object, but Andrew silenced him with a raised hand. "That's reasonable." "What else?" "A formal apology. Not just to me, but to Antonio, who had to pick up the pieces when you discarded me." "The chef?" my mother asked incredulously. "Samantha, really? He showed me more parental love in the years he worked for us than either of you ever did," I stated flatly. "And he was the only one who helped me when I needed it most." My father's jaw worked silently, pride warring with desperation. These terms seemed designed to humiliate us rather than facilitate a business arrangement. "They're designed to acknowledge the truth," I corrected him, "something this family has never been good at." "And if we agree," Andrew asked, "what exactly are you offering?" James outlined the business details: a long-term lease agreement for the upper floors of our building, terms that would satisfy their investors while preserving our restaurant space. The arrangement would save their development project without requiring us to give up ownership. "We need to discuss this privately," my father said stiffly. "Of course," I replied. "We'll give you a few minutes." When James and I stepped out again, I sagged against him, emotionally drained. "You were magnificent in there," he murmured, against my hair. "I don't feel magnificent. I don't even know what I feel." Before he could respond, the office door opened. Andrew emerged alone. "They're still discussing," he said, approaching us hesitantly. "But I wanted to talk to you without them." I straightened, bracing myself for whatever manipulation might be coming. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Not just for telling them about culinary school back then, but for not finding you afterward, for not standing up to them, for letting myself become exactly what they wanted at the expense of everything else." The apology caught me off guard with its apparent sincerity. "I looked for you after college," he continued. "But you'd changed your name, moved around. By the time I hired a private investigator, you'd become Samantha Reed." "Why did you look?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because nothing was the same after you left. The house felt empty. Mom and Dad threw themselves even more into work. I realized too late what really mattered." I studied my brother's face, searching for signs of the manipulative tactics our parents had perfected. Instead, I found only regret and exhaustion. "Your conditions are more than fair," he said. "And, for what it's worth, I'll make sure they accept them all." The office door opened again, revealing our parents. My mother's perfect makeup couldn't conceal the redness around her eyes. My father looked every bit of his 65 years. "We accept your terms," he announced, the words clearly costing him dearly. My mother nodded stiffly. "All of them?" Andrew looked between us, a tentative smile forming. "Then we have a deal. We'll have formal paperwork drawn up tomorrow," James confirmed. My father extended his hand automatically, the businessman's gesture ingrained after decades. After a moment's hesitation, I shook it, feeling the calluses that had formed from years of kitchen work against his smooth palm. "I trust you'll have your lawyers review the agreement promptly," I said. Of course, he replied already, shifting back to business mode, his comfort zone. My mother hesitated, then stepped forward. Samantha the first. She faltered, seemingly at a loss for words, a first in my experience. I hope this might be a beginning rather than just a business transaction. That remains to be seen, I answered honestly. 15 years of silence isn't erased by one evening's convenience. She nodded, accepting this boundary, if not fully understanding it. As they gathered their things to leave, the weight of the evening hung heavy in the air. No tearful reconciliation, no dramatic forgiveness scene like in the movies, just the tentative possibility that something broken might someday be, if not repaired, then at least acknowledged. At the door, Andrew lingered behind our parents. "Can I call you?" he asked quietly. "Just to talk. No business, no family drama." I hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." After they left, James and I stood in the empty restaurant, the space that represented everything I'd built without them. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I think so," I replied, surprised to find it was mostly true. I didn't give them what they wanted, not exactly. But I didn't choose revenge either. "You chose dignity," James said, "and maybe that's the best revenge of all." As we turned out the lights and locked up, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but the first step toward whatever might come next. The burden I'd carried for 15 years felt marginally lighter, not because I'd let my parents off the hook, but because I'd finally stood my ground on my own terms. The scared 17-year-old girl who'd been thrown away had become a woman strong enough to set boundaries with the very people who had once defined her entire world. And in that strength I found a peace I hadn't realized I was seeking. 1 year passed with remarkable swiftness. The seasons changed, our restaurant continued to thrive, and the careful dance of reconnection with my family proceeded in fits and starts. My parents fulfilled their obligations under our agreement with minimal enthusiasm but complete compliance. The lease was signed, the scholarship foundation funded, and a formal dinner arranged, where they publicly acknowledged me as their daughter and celebrated my culinary accomplishments. That dinner remains one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Watching my father raise a glass to toast my daughter, the renowned chef Samantha Reed, while society photographers captured the moment for posterity. The strain behind his smile was visible only to those who knew him well, but the words themselves were a victory I'd never thought possible. My mother adapted more readily her social instincts, eventually overcoming her pride. She began with awkward monthly phone calls that felt like conversations between strangers. Over time, these evolved into more natural exchanges, though a certain formality remained. "I've been trying those meditation techniques you suggested," she told me during one call, surprising me with this small confidence. "The doctor says it's helping with my blood pressure." These glimpses of vulnerability from a woman who had always presented perfect composure were disconcerting but somehow hopeful. My father maintained a professional distance, our interactions limited primarily to necessary business matters. Yet even in this, there was progress. He no longer spoke to me with the dismissive tone he'd once used, and occasionally I caught him watching me with an expression that might have been respect. During a quarterly review meeting for the lease agreement, he actually asked my opinion on a business matter unrelated to our arrangement. "The approach you took with your restaurant marketing was effective," he admitted grudgingly. "We're considering something similar for our retail spaces." It wasn't an apology or even affection, but from Richard Mitchell, acknowledgement of my business acumen was significant. My relationship with Andrew developed most naturally. Our weekly dinners at the restaurant became a ritual we both protected. He would arrive after service, and we'd share a meal while gradually rebuilding the connection that had been severed 15 years ago. "Do you remember the treehouse Dad built us when you were 10 and I was 7? He asked one evening over dessert. "The one with the secret compartment in the floor." I smiled at the memory. "Where we hid all the candy Mom wouldn't let us have. And your drawings," he added. I found one when they were renovating the property last year. A sketch of the kitchen with you standing at the stove. You must have been about 9. You kept it? I asked, surprised. He nodded, something like shame crossing his face. I kept a lot of things from before. Everything. Your birthday cards to me. The mix CD you made when I was going through that awful middle school phase. I couldn't quite let go of my sister even when I was too cowardly to stand with her. These moments of reconnection were healing in ways I hadn't anticipated, not erasing the past but building something new alongside it. The most unexpected development in this year of change was my pregnancy. James and I had talked about children for years, but the timing had never seemed right. Now, as my professional life stabilized and my personal wounds began to heal, we found ourselves preparing to welcome a daughter of our own. What will you tell her about us? My mother asked when we announced the news, her voice tentative. The truth, I replied simply. Both the good and the bad. She deserves to know her full history. The pregnancy softened something in my mother that years of estrangement hadn't touched. She began sending carefully selected baby items, a silver rattle, a handmade quilt, a first edition copy of the book she used to read to me as a child. I made mistakes, she said during her first visit to our home after the announcement. Too many to count. I don't expect to be forgiven, but I hope I might have a chance to do better as a grandmother than I did as a mother. The vulnerability in her admission was so unlike the woman who had coldly watched me pack a single suitcase 15 years ago, that I found myself nodding before I'd consciously decided to. Even my father showed signs of change. When the business crisis passed and Mitchell Enterprises stabilized, he made no move to renegotiate our agreement or distance himself again. Instead, he awkwardly offered business advice for our restaurant group's expansion plans, and more surprisingly arranged for Antonio to fly in from Italy for a visit. It seemed appropriate, was all he said when I questioned this unexpected gesture. The reunion with Antonio was emotional for us both. The man who had believed in me when no one else did, embraced me with tears in his eyes, marveling at all I had accomplished. I always knew, he said proudly. From the first time you held a knife, I knew you had the heart of a great chef. Watching him tour my kitchen, approving of my techniques, and tasting my signature dishes brought my journey full circle in the most meaningful way. The Sunday before my due date, we hosted a family dinner at our home. Not a formal restaurant affair, but a meal I cooked myself in the spacious kitchen James and I had designed together. Andrew came with his new wife, a warm, artistic woman who seemed to have helped him finally break free of our parents' rigid expectations. When the doorbell rang earlier than expected, I opened it to find my parents standing awkwardly on the doorstep, a large gift box in my mother's arms. We know we're early, she apologized. But we wanted a moment to talk before everyone arrived. I invited them in this odd new version of my parents, who were neither the loving family I'd craved as a child, nor the cold strangers who had discarded me. They were something in between, flawed people trying in their imperfect way to make amends. As I served the meal I'd prepared, I observed the tentative connections forming around my table. This gathering would have been unimaginable 2 years ago, yet here we were not a perfect family by any means, but one that was at least attempting to heal. Later, as conversation flowed more easily than I'd dared hope, I caught James watching me with a mixture of love and concern. "You okay?" he murmured. "Yes," I realized, somewhat surprised. "I actually am." The peace I felt wasn't about forgiving and forgetting. It was about recognizing that I could set the terms for these relationships now. I could maintain boundaries while still allowing for growth. I could acknowledge the past without being defined by it. That night, after everyone had gone and James and I were preparing for bed, I stood before the nursery we'd created for our daughter, my hand resting on my swollen belly. "She'll never doubt that she's loved," I promised softly, "no matter what path she chooses." James wrapped his arms around me from behind. "She'll have you as her mother." That already gives her an advantage I can't quite put into words. The journey from that terrified 17-year-old girl to the woman I'd become hadn't been easy. There had been moments of despair so profound I wasn't sure I'd survive them. But those same challenges had forged a strength in me that no amount of privilege could have provided. Sometimes the family we build matters more than the family we're born into. Sometimes the wounds of our past become the wisdom that guides our future. And sometimes, just sometimes, even the most broken relationships can find a new form if we're brave enough to set our terms and stand our ground. As my daughter kicked beneath my palm, I smiled at the knowledge that while my story had been shaped by rejection, hers would begin with acceptance. The cycle would end with me. If there's one thing I've learned through this entire journey, it's that true family is about more than blood or obligation. It's about respect, support, and the courage to love people as they are, not as we wish them to be. It took losing my family to find that truth, but in the end, perhaps that was the lesson I needed most. I'd love to hear your thoughts on family relationships and setting boundaries. Have you ever had to stand your ground with family members who hurt you? Did you choose forgiveness, distance, or something in between? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about rebuilding and finding strength after betrayal. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. Your support means more than you know.